I wasn't invited to my mom's birthday dinner. It's just for people who've been supportive lately, my sister said. The next day, I got a request. $10,150. Your share of the private room plus cake. I froze the joint credit card, logged them out of my Netflix, and flagged the restaurant bill as fraud. By morning, I had 88 messages. You're not acting like a real family. The notification lit up my phone at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. A Zelle request for $1,050. Private room plus cake, Rachel. No greeting, no explanation, just a demand for money from my sister like I was some kind of ATM she could access whenever convenient. I stared at the screen, certain it had to be some kind of mistake. Rachel, the same sister I'd helped through a $1,000 veterinary emergency just last November. The same one I'd given $9,000 to last year when she declared she was done with corporate life forever and wanted to launch her own skincare empire. That brilliant venture had lasted exactly 3 months before she moved on to the next big dream. My thumb hovered over the request, confusion turning slowly into something colder. Then, almost against my better judgment, I opened Instagram. Sometimes you know you're about to see something that will hurt, but you look anyway. The first story belonged to my cousin Nia, a boomerang of champagne flutes clinking in warm, amber lighting. I recognized the steakhouse immediately. One of those places where they dim the lights just enough to make everything feel special and charge accordingly. I tapped to the next story, my stomach already dropping. There it was. The group photo that explained everything. My mother sat at the center of a long table, radiant in the silk scarf I'd given her last Christmas, leaning forward to blow out candles on an elaborate white cake. My father was beside her, wearing his best smile, the one he reserved for photographs and special occasions. Rachel sat across from them next to her boyfriend Jordan, looking perfectly at ease. Even Uncle Terry was there, Uncle Terry, who hadn't managed to stay sober at a family gathering since the Obama administration. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, holding my phone like it contained evidence of a crime. In a way it did. The crime of being erased from your own family's celebration and then being asked to pay for the privilege. I didn't respond immediately. I've learned that anger makes you say things you can't take back, and I needed to understand what was happening before I decided how to handle it. 3 hours later, when I finally texted Rachel asking what this was all about, her response came back in 3 words that felt like a slap. It was private. Then, as if that wasn't clear enough. Just for people who've been supportive lately. Supportive. I read that word twice, then 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Supportive. Like I hadn't co-signed the credit card my parents used for daily expenses. Like I hadn't covered shortfalls and paid bills when Dad's pension got delayed. Like I hadn't bailed Rachel out more times than I could count. I hadn't just supported this family, I had subsidized it. But instead of arguing, instead of sending the furious text that was burning in my throat, I did something else. I opened my banking app and froze the joint credit card account. Then I logged into Netflix and changed the password. Amazon Prime, Hulu, the family's Spotify account. One by one, I watched the active sessions disappear as everyone got booted out. The next morning brought 88 notifications. Text messages from my mother, my father, Mia, uncles I hadn't heard from in years. Every single message carried the same undertone, the same accusation wrapped in disappointed family rhetoric. You're not acting like family. That's when the pieces started falling into place. This wasn't spontaneous. Rachel had been orchestrating this for months, maybe longer. All those subtle comments about how distant I'd become, how cold and unreliable I was. All while positioning herself as the loyal daughter, the one who really cared, the one who showed up. She visited more, called more, made herself visible, but only after I'd started covering the family's financial holes. It wasn't affection driving her sudden devotion. It was strategy. Rachel didn't want to share anything with me, not even the illusion of being family. She wanted our parents' house, the one I'd helped renovate after Dad's accident, the one I'd paid property taxes on for 2 years when money got tight. She was drawing a line in the sand, making it clear which side of the family divide I belonged on. Fine. Let her draw her line. But if she wanted me out of the picture, she was going to discover that I wouldn't go quietly, and I wouldn't go empty-handed. I had proof of everything. $9,000 in bank transfers, text messages saying, "I'll pay you back." Emails detailing exactly what each payment was for. Rachel had never expected me to keep such meticulous records. She'd counted on family politeness, on my reluctance to make things awkward, on the assumption that I'd eventually just write it all off as the cost of keeping peace. She was wrong. I stopped responding to the flood of family messages. The moment I stopped being their financial safety net, I became the villain in their story. Good. Let them call me whatever they wanted. This time, I wasn't walking away quietly. 2 days after Rachel's Little Zell performance, my father called. I watched his name flash on my screen and let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened to the message, he sounded tired, like someone who'd been dragged into a drama he didn't fully understand. "We need to talk," he said. "Rachel says you're freezing accounts and causing problems." Causing problems. Not being excluded from family events. Not being used financially. Just causing problems. That was the language now, the framework Rachel had built around this situation. I was the problem, not the person who'd been systematically manipulated and then discarded. I didn't call him back. If they could host a birthday dinner and pretend I didn't exist, I could return the favor. Instead, I went to my computer, pulled up my banking records, and printed out every single transaction with Rachel's name on it. Transfers going back over a year, each one carefully labeled. Rent, just until next paycheck, car loan, utilities, urgent supplies. And that one large payment for her skincare business dream that hadn't lasted a season. That afternoon, I filed a small claims lawsuit. I attached screenshots of her texts promising to pay me back, printed emails outlining what each payment was for, and included a timeline of every financial request she'd made. I knew she'd spin this as me being vindictive, but I was past caring about her narrative. She'd been playing a long game, smiling and maneuvering while quietly cutting me out of the family picture. She just hadn't expected me to fight back without raising my voice. That evening, Mia finally reached out. She'd been quiet through all the family drama, but something had shifted. Her message was careful, apologetic. "Hey, I didn't realize you weren't invited until we were already there. Rachel made it sound like you didn't want to come." I asked her what else Rachel had said, and that's when the full picture came into focus. Rachel had told everyone at the dinner that I'd been pulling away, doing my own thing, too busy for family obligations. She'd painted a picture of someone who wasn't interested in being involved anymore, and people had simply accepted it. No one had called to check with me. No one had questioned her version of events. Then Mia shared something that made my blood run cold. Throughout the dinner, Rachel had kept steering the conversation toward the house, specifically, how it would make sense for her to stay there when our parents got older. She was always the one here anyway, she'd said, speaking as if it were already decided, as if the future had been written and everyone just needed to accept it. The scope of Rachel's manipulation suddenly became clear. This wasn't just about excluding me from one birthday dinner, or even about the money I'd lent her. Rachel was trying to replace me entirely. She'd been laying groundwork for months, maybe longer, shifting how the family saw me. I was cold, distant, unreliable, not the kind of person who stays close to aging parents. Meanwhile, she was the warm, dependable daughter who'd naturally inherit both the house and the responsibility of care. She didn't want me angry and fighting back. She wanted me erased, forgotten, written out of the family story so completely that no one would even think to include me in future plans. I drove to my parents' house the next day without warning. No phone call, no heads up, just showed up one afternoon while Rachel was at work. They looked surprised when they opened the door, but not unwelcoming. We sat in the living room where I'd spent countless childhood hours, and I laid everything out with the calm precision of someone presenting a legal case. I showed them the bank transfers, all $9,000 worth. I pulled up the Zelle request on my phone, showed them the restaurant charge on their joint credit card. I explained that I'd filed a lawsuit, and I watched their faces change as they processed each piece of information. At first, they defended her. Mom suggested that maybe Rachel felt overwhelmed, that she'd been trying to help more lately. Dad mumbled something about miscommunication and misunderstanding. But I could see the gears turning in their minds. They didn't have explanations for the receipts. They couldn't rationalize away a dinner charge on their own credit card for an event I'd been deliberately excluded from. Then I asked the question that cut to the heart of everything. "Did you ever discuss leaving the house to Rachel?" Dad said no immediately, emphatically. But Mom hesitated, and in that pause, I knew there was more to the story. Finally, she admitted that Rachel had brought it up. A few times. Just casual mentions, hypothetical conversations about the future. Maybe she'd be the one to live there someday, since she was around more. Since she was more invested in the family. That was enough. Rachel had been planting seeds for months, slowly and carefully cultivating a version of the future where she was the only child left standing, the natural inheritor of everything our parents had built. I told them I was done providing financial support without transparency. No more credit card bailouts, no more quiet payments to cover shortfalls. If they needed help, we'd discuss it openly, like adults. But I wasn't going to continue playing the role of invisible benefactor while Rachel positioned herself as the devoted daughter. They didn't say much after that revelation. Mom looked like she wanted to argue, but the evidence was overwhelming. I didn't ask them to choose sides. I didn't want to turn this into that kind of fight. But I could see that the truth had landed, and I knew I wasn't finished yet. 3 days later, Rachel finally contacted me. Not with a phone call, or even a real conversation, just a screenshot of the court notice followed by a single line. "You're really going through with this?" I didn't respond. The next day, she escalated with a group text that included my parents, Mia, Jordan, and 2 of our uncles. Her message was a masterpiece of manufactured concern and subtle manipulation. "Hey everyone, just wanted to let you know my name is suing me over money I thought was a gift. It's sad to see family get so petty over finances. I've always done everything I could to keep us close." She attached photos of herself visiting Mom in the hospital the previous year and a screenshot of a Venmo payment she'd made for $200, labeled Mom's Meds. It was like watching someone build a defense case in a group chat, trying to control the narrative one last time. I waited several hours before responding. Then I sent a PDF containing every bank transfer I'd made to Rachel, complete with timestamps and her "I'll pay you back" confirmations. At the bottom, I added just one sentence. "Family doesn't mean free." The group chat went silent. No one responded to either of us. But the next morning, Mia called with information that changed everything. Uncle Gary had contacted her the night before, furious because Rachel had borrowed $4,000 from him last fall and never paid it back. She told him it was for legal expenses but had never mentioned this debt to anyone else in the family. Then there was Aunt Lynn, who'd apparently lent Rachel $1,200 in January after being told it was to help with Mom's medical bills. Mom had never seen a cent of that money. The pattern was becoming clear. Rachel hadn't just been setting me up for exclusion, she'd been systematically draining money from multiple family members while positioning herself as the one carrying the financial burden. And the house scheme wasn't just wishful thinking. Mia had discovered that Rachel had already contacted a real estate agent, not to sell the property, but to ask about transferring ownership early if both parents agreed. Rachel had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed everyone would remain isolated, that no one would compare notes, or question her version of events. I updated my court filing with additional documentation and mentioned that I had witnesses if needed. I wasn't trying to destroy Rachel's life, but I wanted her to understand that she couldn't continue manipulating people without consequences, especially not me. Then I made one final strategic move. I set up a new account for my parents' expenses, one that I controlled directly. I told them they could ask me for help whenever they needed it, but everything would be discussed openly. No more intermediaries, no more Rachel quietly bleeding the account dry while pretending to be the family's financial manager. A few days later, Dad called to apologize. He said he hadn't known about the money, hadn't seriously discussed giving Rachel the house, and that they'd been blind to how she'd been operating. Then he said something that surprised me. "We'll make it right." He didn't elaborate, but I could hear the shift in his voice. Something fundamental had changed in how they saw the situation, and how they saw Rachel. Rachel went uncharacteristically quiet after that. Normally, when she felt cornered, she'd double down with drama, play the victim, flood the family with emotional messages designed to generate sympathy. But this time, there was just silence. No group chats, no cryptic social media posts, no attempts to control the narrative. Then came the email. 5 paragraphs sent to our parents, me, Mia, and several other relatives. It was a carefully crafted piece of deflection and blame disguised as an explanation. She claimed the money had never been formally discussed as a loan, that she was shocked and hurt by the lawsuit, and that she'd only ever tried to bring the family together. She called me, emotionally distant, and said my reaction proved I'd never cared about family dynamics. At the bottom, she wrote something that made me laugh out loud. Going forward, I'll be stepping back from any responsibilities involving Mom and Dad. I've done what I could. If others want to take over, that's fine. Translation: she knew she'd lost. The phone calls started within days. Uncle Gary, furious that Rachel had ghosted him about the $4,000 she'd borrowed with promises to return it by February. It was now May. Aunt Lynn called to say Rachel had told her I was threatening to cut our parents off financially unless she stepped in to take over, painting herself as the reluctant hero forced to carry an impossible burden. I shared the details of the lawsuit with both of them, explained about the house inquiry, the real estate consultation. By the end of the week, 4 more relatives had reached out. The pattern was identical. Rachel had borrowed money from multiple people, always citing family emergencies or vague health-related costs, always using our parents' situations as justification. The house revelation confirmed what I'd suspected. Mia had tracked down the real estate agent's name. Rachel had met with her twice, discussing early ownership transfers and even floating the idea of buying out my share after our parents passed. She told the agent I probably wouldn't care about keeping the property anyway, that I wasn't really involved in family affairs. She never imagined I would find out, much less fight back. I decided to bring everything together in one comprehensive email to the same group Rachel had contacted, plus a few additional relatives who deserved to know the truth. The message contained 3 sections: a timeline of every payment I'd made on behalf of our parents over the past 2 years, documented proof of the $9,000 loan to Rachel, and a list of family members who'd confirmed lending her money under similar circumstances. No emotional language, no accusations, just facts presented in chronological order. At the end, I added one line: I'm no longer participating in any conversation where lies are being used as currency. That email broke something fundamental in the family dynamic. Not in me, I felt clearer and more centered than I had in months. But it shattered the carefully constructed story Rachel had been building around herself and her motivations. Mom called the next day, crying. Not for Rachel, she clarified, but because she hadn't seen the manipulation happening while I was quietly helping from the sidelines. Dad got on the phone too, explaining that he and Mom were updating their will. The house wouldn't go to anyone until both of them were gone, and everything would be split equally down to the last penny. The next morning, Rachel finally snapped. She sent me paragraphs of rage, calling me cold, calculating, and vindictive. I should have known I'd lawyer up the second things didn't go my way, she wrote. She said I'd humiliated her in front of the entire family, that real family doesn't do this to each other. I didn't reply because I didn't need to. She'd spent months trying to ensure I didn't get what she thought I didn't deserve. Now she had exactly what she deserved, and I still had both the truth and the receipts to prove it. Rachel must have realized she was completely out of options when my lawyer responded to her last-minute settlement offer with a single sentence. We're proceeding as filed. She'd offered to pay back $1,500 and call everything even. After months of manipulation, financial drain, and attempted property theft, she thought she could throw a handful of bills at the problem and make it disappear. We didn't even consider it. A week before the court date, Rachel tried one final desperate move. She showed up at our parents' house unannounced, something she'd never done during her months of devoted caregiving. Mom called me 10 minutes after she left. She says you're trying to bankrupt her, Mom reported, but I could hear the skepticism in her voice. I asked what else Rachel had said, and Mom admitted that she'd brought up the house again. Maybe it was time to just decide ownership before things got messy. She didn't feel safe not knowing where things stood. She'd already put in so much effort, invested so much of herself in caring for them. This time, Dad shut her down immediately. He told her the will had been updated, everything was decided, and there was nothing more to discuss. Equal split, no early decisions, no special arrangements based on perceived devotion or proximity. Rachel left without saying goodbye. Something unexpected happened after that confrontation. Uncle Gary filed his own small claims case. Aunt Lynn was considering doing the same. My email hadn't just been informational, it had given them permission to hold Rachel accountable for her actions. She'd been counting on everyone's politeness, their guilt, their fear of family drama. But when the spell of manipulation finally broke, it broke completely and dramatically. Rachel stopped responding to family texts. She didn't show up for Sunday dinner. When Mia posted a photo of us having coffee together, Rachel blocked her on all social media. 3 days before our court hearing, I received an email from Jordan, Rachel's boyfriend. It was brief and careful. Hey, I don't want to be in the middle of all this. Just wanted to say I didn't know the full story. I hope things work out. No hard feelings. I didn't respond, but I took a screenshot just in case. The court hearing was anticlimactic. Rachel showed up alone, avoided eye contact, and said very little. My lawyer presented our case methodically: payments, text confirmations, dates, bank records. Rachel tried to argue that the money had been gifts, but the judge wasn't buying it. The evidence was too comprehensive, too well documented. She was ordered to repay the full $9,000 over 12 months. No interest, but a formal judgment on the record that would follow her credit report for years. When the hearing ended, Rachel walked straight out without looking back. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt finished. The family had finally seen what I'd been seeing for years, not because I'd shouted the loudest or made the most dramatic accusations, but because the truth was too consistent to ignore. Once Rachel couldn't manipulate the narrative anymore, there was nothing left to hold her story together. Back at my parents' house, the atmosphere had completely changed. The tension that had been building for months was gone, replaced by something that felt like relief. Mom asked if we could set up the bill-paying account again, but this time with both of them involved directly. No back doors, no secret access, no financial middlemen. I agreed, not out of obligation or guilt, but because I finally knew the help wouldn't be taken for granted or used against me. Rachel didn't come around after the court judgment. She couldn't. The house was no longer hers to scheme for. The support pipeline had been cut off at the source. The masks were off, and everyone could finally see the difference between genuine help and calculated manipulation. Rachel was out of moves, and for the first time in years, that felt like justice. She left without a word to anyone, not to me, not to our parents, not to any family member. Mia discovered through a tagged Instagram story that Rachel had moved to Arizona. New apartment, new job, new city, as if changing her scenery would somehow change the story she'd written for herself. She didn't even send a goodbye text. The final court ruling made everything official. Monthly payments over a year, no excuses, no delays, no loopholes. For the first time in her adult life, Rachel was being held accountable for something she couldn't spin, deflect, or manipulate her way out of. Accountability wasn't a language she'd ever learned to speak, and she clearly hated every moment of it. Our parents stopped asking about her after a while. Mom mentioned once that Rachel had texted about focusing on her mental health and needing space from toxic family dynamics. I didn't ask for clarification. I already knew how Rachel's mind worked. To her, accountability looked like cruelty, and boundaries looked like betrayal. But to me, it looked like peace. With Rachel gone, everything in our family shifted. Our parents started talking to me more, and not just when they needed help. We discussed real things, the past, the future, their hopes and concerns. Dad apologized again, unprompted this time, for not seeing through Rachel's manipulations. He admitted he'd always assumed that because she was physically around more, she was more emotionally invested. He hadn't realized that showing up physically didn't mean showing up truthfully. They asked me to help restructure their finances properly. We implemented safeguards to prevent what had happened with the joint credit card from ever happening again. They also officially updated their will, with witnesses and legal documentation. Equal split, no early transfers, no promises made in private conversations. They even included a clause requiring that any inheritance discussions involve direct communication and shared decisions, no more family business conducted through whispers and manipulation. Rachel was excluded from all future planning unless she made contact. Sincere contact, not manipulation disguised as reconciliation. That door wasn't locked, but it wasn't open either. She'd have to knock now, and she'd have to do it honestly. Meanwhile, something else was happening in our extended family. Uncle Gary got his money back through the court system. Rachel didn't even bother showing up to that hearing. The ruling was swift and decisive. Aunt Lynn chose not to file her own suit, but she told me over the phone that she was completely done with Rachel. She'd blocked her number and had zero intention of unblocking it. The lie that hit Aunt Lynn the hardest was Rachel's claim that I was threatening to cut our parents off financially unless she stepped in to help. That fabrication was personal, designed to make me look like a villain while positioning Rachel as the reluctant hero forced to sacrifice for the greater good. Mia and I grew closer through all of this. She told me she regretted not speaking up sooner, that she'd seen the manipulation happening but hoped things would just balance themselves out naturally. They never do, of course. Not until someone draws a line and refuses to move. I drew that line, and yes, it got ugly. But it also finally got honest. Jordan, Rachel's ex-boyfriend, sent me one last message a few weeks after the court ruling. I didn't know she owed that many people money. I didn't even know about the house stuff. You were right to walk away. It was strange hearing validation from someone in Rachel's inner circle, but I appreciated his honesty. He was the only person in her life who even attempted to acknowledge what had actually happened. Rachel never replied to the email I sent after the court decision. I told her not to contact me again, that I didn't hate her, but I also wasn't going to pretend anymore. She would pay what she owed, and that would be the end of our story. I meant every word. The last payment came through this month, 10 months after she'd left for Arizona. She'd been quiet the entire time, no drama, no emotional appeals, just the required monthly deposit that served as a reminder of the person she tried to be and failed to become. I don't think about Rachel much anymore, and when I do, it's not with anger. It's with clarity. She tried to make me look like the problem so she could maintain her access to the house, to our parents, to my financial support, to control over the family narrative. She'd almost succeeded. But people like Rachel always overplay their hand eventually. They mistake kindness for weakness and silence for approval. They forget that the quiet ones are often taking notes, and eventually, those quiet ones act. Rachel got what she wanted in the end. She's alone now, and for the first time in years, that's not my responsibility to fix. It had been just over a year since Rachel had disappeared into Arizona silence when the letter arrived. The debt had been officially cleared the month before. The final payment had come through without fanfare, just another electronic deposit marking the end of our financial entanglement. I'd assumed that was it. Done, finished, over. Then I found the handwritten envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my name and address and Rachel's distinctive handwriting. My first thought was that this might be one of those dramatic final statements people sometimes feel compelled to make. Maybe a passive-aggressive apology, maybe one last attempt to justify everything that had happened. But when I opened it and read the contents, I had to go through it twice to believe what I was seeing. She wasn't writing to apologize or to offer closure. Rachel was asking for help. The letter described a string of recent misfortunes. Her car had been broken into, her phone stolen, she was in a rough situation, financially. She claimed to be trying to get back on her feet, looking for a new apartment after losing her latest job. She didn't ask for money directly, but the implication was clear throughout every carefully crafted sentence. She mentioned how isolating the past year had been, how things had gotten out of control, and how she wished our family could somehow return to the way things used to be. No return address, no phone number, just a P.O. box scribbled in the corner like an afterthought. And then, at the bottom of the page, the line that showed me she still understood nothing. If you ever want to talk, I'm still your sister. That sentence stopped me cold. Not because it moved me or made me reconsider anything, but because it revealed that Rachel's fundamental worldview hadn't changed at all. She still believed that being my sister was enough, that after everything, the lies, the manipulation, the money, the attempted theft of our parents' house, she could simply declare blood over truth and expect the door to swing open again. She still thought this whole conflict had been about feelings instead of actions, about family dynamics instead of deliberate betrayal. She was still operating from the same playbook that had gotten her exiled in the first place. I didn't respond to the letter. Instead, I took a photo of it and sent it to my parents with a simple message. She's still fishing. Dad's response was immediate and brief. Not surprised. Mom took longer to reply, but when she did, her message said everything. She still thinks this is about feelings. It's about trust. Neither of them wrote Rachel back. The door I'd mentioned in my final email to her, the one that wasn't locked but wasn't open either, remained firmly closed. She'd burned it herself with months of calculated manipulation, and a single letter asking for help wasn't going to rebuild what she'd destroyed. I don't know where Rachel is now, beyond whatever city houses that P.O. box. I don't know if she'll keep writing letters, keep testing to see if time has softened our resolve. I don't know if she's learned anything from the consequences of her actions, or if she's simply looking for new people to manipulate. But I do know this: for the first time in our relationship, Rachel is truly on the outside looking in. The only way back to this family is through a door she set fire to herself. And the only key that might unlock it, genuine accountability, honest acknowledgement of what she did, real change instead of strategic positioning, is something she's never shown any ability or willingness to use. She wanted to erase me from the family story and write herself in as the central character. Instead, she erased herself and left behind only the truth of what she tried to do. That truth became her legacy, and unlike her carefully constructed lies, it can't be manipulated or changed. Rachel is alone now, and after everything she put this family through, that solitude is entirely of her own making. For the first time in my adult life, her problems are not my responsibility to solve, and that feels like the most honest ending this story could have.